When a former royal goes head-to-head with Britain's sharpest tongue on live TV, it's not just awkward, it's downright explosive. Tonight, we take a look at how Meghan Markle pushed Graham Norton to his edge, leading him to do something no one ever expected: ask her to leave his show. What began as light-hearted teasing quickly spiraled into a heated clash of pride and personality, showing that even Britain's most charismatic host has his limits when respect is no longer in the room. Under the glowing purple and red lights of the Graham Norton show's set, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Cameras rolled as Graham spun in his chair, his familiar mischievous grin flashing at the crowd. Everyone expected an entertaining night. After all, tonight's guest was Meghan Markle, a figure who had fascinated, divided, and exhausted public opinion all at once. Graham gave a playful tug to his cufflinks and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle." The audience responded with polite though cautious applause as Meghan stepped out in a fitted green dress, her hair styled to perfection. The sharp sound of her heels echoed through the quieter moments of the studio. She offered a polished smile and a wave that felt more ceremonial than heartfelt. "Meghan, wonderful to have you here," Graham said, rising to greet her with the usual air kisses. "Thank you, Graham. Lovely to be here," she replied smoothly, her eyes flicking toward the cameras, seemingly checking her angles before locking onto him. From the outset there was tension, not the nervous kind, but the kind born of two strong personalities sizing each other up. Meghan took her seat on the famous red couch, legs crossed neatly, hands placed calmly in her lap. Wasting no time, Graham launched into his usual banter. "So, Meghan, the world can't seem to stop talking about you these days. You're practically keeping half the British tabloids afloat. Is that the plan? Boost the economy all by yourself?" The audience chuckled at the cheeky jab, but Meghan's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, Graham," she replied steadily, "I wouldn't expect you to understand the weight of living under constant public attack, but I wouldn't call it boosting the economy. It's more like feeding scavengers." Graham chuckled, raising his brows slightly. "Feeding scavengers, is it? Well, you've definitely had your say. Interviews, a book, a whole Netflix series. You've given the press plenty to work with." Meghan tilted her head with a small, knowing smile. "I'm sorry, Graham. Is this your show or their show? Are you here to ask your questions or just repeat tabloid chatter?" This time, the audience's laughter came out uneasy, and Graham's grin tightened just a little. Still, staying in character, he leaned back and clasped his hands over one knee. "Oh, these are definitely my questions, though I'd bet good money they're the ones people at home are most curious about." "Then maybe," she replied crisply, "you should consider asking better ones." The mood shifted immediately, the playful tones slipping away. Meghan's barbs grew sharper, and Graham's patience wore thinner. What had started as clever back and forth now felt like an intense verbal duel. The air in the studio turned tense with each exchange as Meghan's pointed remarks met Graham's sharp wit. But even Britain's most seasoned host has a threshold. Taking a sip of water and setting the glass down slowly, Graham locked eyes with her. "So, Meghan," he said with calm precision, "you've always been an advocate for honesty and openness. Let's be honest then. Do you ever regret stepping away from the royal family, or did everything play out exactly how you planned it?" Meghan's lips tightened before she answered. "Regret? No. I regret trusting the wrong people, but leaving? Absolutely not." Graham leaned in slightly, resting an elbow on his knee. "That sounds convincing. Though some might say you've made a habit out of walking away from responsibilities." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Meghan's head turned sharply toward him, her smile vanishing. "Excuse me? Is this how you treat all your guests, Graham? Or am I just a special case?" "Oh no," he replied with his smirk reappearing. "Only the special ones." Meghan laughed, but the sound lacked warmth. "I suppose you need to provoke someone to make good TV. Is that the plan here?" Because right now, it feels more like bad therapy. The audience offered an awkward laugh, but the energy in the room had clearly shifted. Meghan leaned in, her tone growing colder. You know, Graham, for someone who lives off telling other people's stories, you're not very good at actually listening to them. Graham's expression darkened. Oh, I listen just fine. I also know when a story's more of a performance than the truth. That one landed hard. Meghan straightened her back, her voice gaining a new firmness. Performance? Are you suggesting that my life is some sort of act? Graham gave a cool shrug. Well, you are an actress. The audience reacted instantly, some with gasps, others with uneasy laughter. Even the band members glanced at each other nervously as Meghan's face flushed a deep red. You know what? She shot back, her voice now echoing just slightly louder. At least I know who I am. I'm not hiding behind a desk making snide remarks about others because I'm too scared to take real chances. Graham's expression tightened, his hands clasping together more firmly. Well, at least I don't confuse victimhood with bravery. The air turned cold. Meghan blinked, caught off guard for a moment, but quickly recovered. The familiar mask of calm returned as she replied, You really think you're clever, don't you? Sitting here week after week, turning other people's pain into entertainment. Better than profiting from it, Graham said smoothly, not missing a beat. The audience collectively inhaled, the tension between them now thick with unspoken truths. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her voice low and sharp. Careful, Graham. You're one question away from making a very big mistake. Graham didn't flinch, his voice equally measured. And what mistake would that be? Asking you what everyone else is already wondering? Meghan let out a short, bitter laugh. No, forgetting that you're not untouchable. The silence that followed was suffocating. The audience sat motionless, barely breathing, unsure of what might come next. Graham slowly leaned back, his fingers pressed together in front of his face, studying her as though she were a chess opponent. Touché, he said at last, voice calm but edged with steel. Let's see how long you can keep this up. By now, the atmosphere in the studio was beyond tense. Every word between them felt like a blow, and everyone watching could sense it. Meghan's words had shattered the usual decorum, and even Graham's renowned patience was beginning to fray. What had started as entertaining banter had turned into a standoff of egos, with either side willing to yield. Yet no one could predict just how far things would go. Meghan now sat stiffly on the sofa, her arms crossed, her eyes flickering with fire. Graham, known for his effortless calm, sat unusually still, his usual smirk replaced with a flat line of irritation. The audience, expecting laughs and celebrity stories, now sat in tense silence, afraid even to cough. Finally, Graham spoke, slicing through the silence. At least we agree on one thing. You're consistent. Consistently combative. Meghan let out a dry laugh. You're hilarious, Graham. A man who's made a career out of poking at people now finds me combative. How creative. Graham raised an eyebrow. Not creative, Meghan. Just honest. She tilted her head slightly, voice laced with sarcasm. Do you win a medal every time you insult someone on your couch? Enough for headlines, but not enough to get cancelled. Is that the game here? A few nervous laughs slipped from the crowd. Graham's mouth twitched, but it wasn't amusement. Oh, don't flatter yourself, Meghan. I've had far more difficult guests than you. Meghan leaned in, her voice dropping to a cutting whisper. I'm sure you have. But tell me, how many of them left this stage regretting they ever showed up? Graham's jaw tensed subtly, and he adjusted his cuffs with practiced calm before replying. The ones who mistake accountability for cruelty usually do. Meghan hesitated, the words catching her slightly off guard, but she quickly found her footing again, her voice now louder. Please. You're not holding anyone accountable here. You're just another bitter man trying to stay relevant by tearing others down. Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Even the musicians stopped touching their instruments. Graham's eyes darkened. Bitter? He repeated slowly, his tone low but firm. You're calling me bitter. Meghan didn't back down. That's right. Bitter. Jaded. Cynical. Take your pick. He inhaled slowly, nostrils flaring slightly. Better cynical than self-righteous. Meghan's cheeks flushed again, but she smiled, a small, unyielding smile. That's cute, Graham. Really. Turning it back on me. Is that what you do when you run out of real questions? Graham shifted in his seat, no longer hiding his annoyance. Oh, believe me, I've still got plenty. Then came the remark that changed everything. Meghan leaned forward, her voice openly mocking now. You know, I finally understand why you've never gone beyond this couch. You're too scared to create anything real. It's easier to stay here, taking shots at people who've actually dared to do something. The studio let out a collective gasp. Graham's eyes narrowed sharply, and the color drained from his face. You think sitting here means this isn't real work? That it has no meaning? That's rich, coming from someone who's turned her pain into a product. Meghan laughed out loud, sharp and cutting, a sound that startled even the crew into stillness. There it is. The truth. You can't stand the fact that I walked away and still became more than you'll ever be. Graham's voice finally rose, louder than before, shaking the calm that had barely held. You think leaving responsibilities behind and crying about it makes you noble? That's when Meghan stood up. The movement was sudden, bold, and defiant. The audience recoiled slightly, feeling the heat of what had just sparked. You don't get to speak to me like that. Meghan hissed, standing firm. You don't know me, Graham. You don't understand what I've been through. Graham's voice dropped, now calm but laced with cold finality. And you don't know when to stop. Both of them now stood, facing each other across the famous red sofa like opponents in a standoff, the air between them charged with fury and pride. Meghan crossed her arms and stepped closer, her voice tight. You're pathetic. Graham gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. And you're done. The crowd collectively gasped. Even the studio lighting seemed to dim as if the very room sensed something final had happened. Meghan's fists clenched at her sides, her voice falling to a harsh whisper still picked up by the mic. You'll regret this. Graham didn't hesitate. Oh, my dear, he replied with biting calm. I already do. The silence was suffocating. They stood rigid, locked in a gaze neither willing to break. The tension was thick enough to freeze the entire room. Meghan and Graham, toe-to-toe in a standoff of ego, both unwilling to be the first to step down. But even the most intense moments eventually reached their limit, and when this one broke, it did so with force. What followed was a moment no one in that studio would forget. Graham crossed a line, not with anger, but with clarity. He transformed from witty host into someone decisive and unsparing. And Meghan, her pride bruised, found herself making a quiet, staggering exit. The pause dragged on like an eternity. Meghan stood still, arms folded, breathing sharp. Graham leaned against the red sofa, his knuckles white as he gripped it, jaw set tight. A cough came from somewhere in the crowd. Another person muttered, "Oh my God!" just above a whisper. The cameras didn't flinch, capturing every second like hunters watching prey. Then Graham straightened up. His usual sparkle was gone, replaced by cold control. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his tie, and spoke with measured precision. "Meghan," he said formally, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I think we're done here." Meghan blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, voice firm and unshaken. "This conversation stopped being productive quite a while ago. And as much as I love a good debate," he paused, letting the words hang in the air, "I can't allow my show to become your personal therapy session." A gasp swept through the crowd. Meghan parted her lips to speak, stunned for the first time all night. "You're kicking me off your show?" Her voice lifted, edged with disbelief. Graham offered a half-smile, cool, detached, without a hint of humor. "Let's call it ending early, for everyone's sake." On the side of the stage, producers exchanged panicked looks but did nothing. Meghan's arms dropped to her sides, her fingers curling into fists again. "You don't get to dismiss me like that," she started, her voice trembling. "Like some forgettable guest." Graham raised one hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Oh, I'm not dismissing you because you're forgettable," he said without hesitation. "I'm dismissing you because you're unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons." The audience audibly reacted, some gasping, some murmuring in shock. A few even clapped before stopping themselves, unsure whether to cheer or be stunned into silence. Meghan stood frozen, her eyes shimmering, not with tears, but with tightly controlled fury. "You'll regret this," she whispered again, the second time more personal, more dangerous. "You think humiliating me makes you powerful? You think this makes you look good?" Graham's expression sharpened into something resembling a weapon. "No, Meghan. This isn't about looking powerful. This is about reminding everyone here, and watching, that respect isn't optional. And you didn't bring yours with you tonight." That was the final blow. Meghan's mouth tightened, her expression solidifying. Without another word, she reached for her clutch on the sofa, straightened her posture, and turned sharply toward the stage exit. The audience held their breath, frozen in suspense. Cameras followed her, capturing each step she took with deliberate focus. When she reached the doors, Meghan paused. Just once, she looked back at Graham. Her face was unreadable, some strange mix of defiance, anger, and perhaps a flicker of regret. Then she walked through, and the doors clicked shut behind her with a soft, echoing sound that felt far louder than it should have. The entire studio seemed to pause in that moment. For a long, uncomfortable beat, Graham remained standing. Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, he adjusted his jacket again, turned to the audience, and with the faintest trace of his old sparkle returning, said, "Well, I suppose we'll need the bigger sofa next time." The studio finally reacted, the tension cracking just enough for a wave of uneasy laughter and scattered applause to fill the space. But the air still carried weight. They all knew they'd witnessed something extraordinary, raw, real, and unforgettable. The laughter in the studio began to rise, blending with unsure applause, yet the weight of what had just unfolded still lingered heavily in the air. The band cautiously picked up their instruments again, playing a few tentative chords to fill the uncomfortable space. Still, everyone in the room, from the crew to the guests to the viewers at home, kept glancing toward the exit, half expecting Meghan to storm back through those studio doors. But she didn't. As the cameras slowly cut away, Graham exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally easing. Yet, the look in his eyes hadn't softened. Whatever had just occurred on that stage had clearly left a mark. Meghan, now somewhere beyond the studio, was already making her way down the hallway, her heels striking the floor with furious rhythm. She was gone physically, but the weight of her presence still filled the room. And though she may have already been crafting her side of the story, one thing was certain: this was a night neither she nor anyone else would forget any time soon. Outside those studio doors, Meghan was already planning her next move, her narrative likely shifting by the second. But inside, everyone remained shaken. The studio, once buzzing with excitement and energy, now felt haunted by what had just taken place. Graham had stood his ground, but it hadn't come without cost. The scars of that encounter, emotional, professional, and personal, were evident even behind his composed exterior. And Meghan? Her exit may have been dramatic, but it was also final. She had come into the studio as a star, and left under a cloud of tension, her image bruised, her pride visibly stung. The audience knew they had witnessed something different from the usual celebrity gossip and charm. This wasn't just a talk show anymore, it had become a televised confrontation, the kind that would be talked about for weeks. And as the lights dimmed and the cameras faded to black, one lingering question remained for everyone who had watched it happen. Was Graham justified in what he did? Or had he crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? One thing is for sure, no one watching would forget the moment Meghan Markle and Graham Norton's worlds collided in such spectacular fashion. So, what did you think of this intense exchange? Did Graham go too far, or was he right to bring it to an end? Share your thoughts in the comments below.